Hey guys, welcome back. So now the new Hulk series by Donny Cates and Ryan Ottley is here. And the first thing I want to say before we even get into it, I made sure going into this series that I wasn't expecting a continuation of the Immortal Hulk. With this being a new series and new writer, it's done in a way to where it really seems like you can just hop right in if you haven't read the Hulk in a while. But even with that being the case, there are a couple instances that seem like they may have connections to the previous series, so as I bring up certain parts, I'll mention that as well. But aside from those moments, which are few and far between, there is a whole lot of other stuff that is just totally new. So with going into this, I will make a couple callbacks, but for the most part, we're just treating this like a whole new thing and just seeing where it goes. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so when we first jump in, we start off with the narration of Doctor Strange, with him expressing that he's always had this theory about the Hulk, to where instead of like where everyone thought that the Hulk was a manifestation of Banner's fury as a child, that instead perhaps the Hulk exists to protect us from Banner, which is also the premise of this first issue. But while Doctor Strange is explaining this to someone off panel, we're simultaneously given a visual of the Hulk showing us what Doctor Strange is explaining at the moment, to where at this time the Hulk is trapped within Bruce's mindscape behind a door that he just can't get through, and he's being kept there by Banner, who more or less has this chip on his shoulder that we learn a bit more about throughout the course of this issue. And really it's here where we see Bruce approached by Betty, with her telling him that he can't keep the Hulk locked in there and how the Hulk is just a child, but also with her telling Bruce that he's hurting himself and the Hulk by doing this because he blames himself for what happened in El Paso, which is really our first hint towards something that had taken place prior to this point that had caused Bruce to go this route. Because in this conversation with Betty, he goes off. He screams in her face saying that he doesn't blame himself, he blames the Hulk, because with whatever happened in El Paso, that incident had showed Bruce that the Hulk is getting out of control. But also with Bruce having this moment and like lashing out with anger, Betty tells him that he's not himself, and it gets interesting where Bruce responds to her like, how would you know? And it's here where Bruce gets into the idea of no one really knowing who Bruce is, because the most, he's only useful when he's not there and the Hulk is needed for something. And it's the disappearing act that he's had enough of, because he never wanted to be a superhero, a defender, or an avenger, or a monster, but instead he just wanted to discover things, invent things, and push the boundaries of what was possible, like a true man of science. But with whatever had taken place within this El Paso incident, this had then revealed to Bruce that there's gonna come a point to where the Hulk comes out, and it's for good. Because the Hulk is immortal, but Bruce isn't. And so with saying this, I want to take a minute and like just talk about the elephant in the room, with this story coming off the heels of the Immortal Hulk. Because without doing any in-depth comparisons just yet, because personally I just believe it's just too early for that, but mainly just focusing on the condition of Bruce walking away from that series. Like if nothing else, that was kind of the biggest mystery, because throughout Immortal Hulk, we got a lot of character development for Savage Hulk, for Joe Fixit, for Devil Hulk, and some for Green Scar, but for the most part there was a lot to be explored about Banner. But with the little that we did get, there's one thing that I do want to mention, because we're not just gonna completely ignore the Immortal Hulk going into this, because I want to mention that at one point we saw Bruce and the Devil Hulk come to a close agreement with the idea of taking over the world, to where after that more of the development went towards Joe Fixit and the Savage Hulk all the way to the conclusion of the series. But also keep in mind that when it wrapped up, we got to look at some of Bruce's thoughts. And even though he didn't specifically remember everything that had happened in the Below place, which presumably was the revelation that was given by the One Above All, but in that conclusion with Bruce walking away with different questions, he had also mentioned, did I somehow absorb the devil on my shoulder? Did I lay an old ghost to rest? Which may have meant that with the death of the Devil Hulk, along with the weird tethering situation that Bruce was wrapped up with the Devil Hulk in the Below place, that this could have then resulted in Bruce merging with the Devil Hulk. And if that is the case, on top of Bruce just not remembering what had happened when he was down there, then it's possible that the take charge mindset that him and the Devil Hulk had agreed on has now just become the perspective of Bruce, to where now in response to El Paso and whatever had taken place there, we're just getting that same response from Bruce but internalized. But as far as this conversation with with Betty. She just tells him that this whole thing is not going to pan out how he thinks it is. The Hulk's going to get out, this whole thing's going to blow up in Bruce's face, and Bruce is pretty much like, fine, that's how it started, that's how it's going to end. And when he dismisses Betty, telling her to get out of his head, she just disappears. And I'm not sure if that was really her, or if Bruce was just sorting some things out here. And with this wild introduction, is here where we go over to see who Doctor Strange is talking to, which as it turns out is the Avengers. And as far as the Avengers lately, in relation to the Hulk, their alert has been raising higher and higher, which is something we've seen before and we talked about. But in this case, with Doctor Strange calling the Avengers together to talk about how the event in El Paso has broken Bruce's mind, and it takes things from keep an eye on him to okay, this is happening territory. Because Doctor Strange tells the Avengers that the condition of Bruce, it troubles him deeply, and what he's discovered at this point that Bruce has done, that terrifies Doctor Strange to his core. Because while Doctor Strange is explaining this to the Avengers, Captain America mentions that he has Tony tracking the Hulk to where we see them going toe to toe through Wundagore, which is an interesting chaotic location. Not about to go on a Chthon theory tangent, just gonna leave that alone for now. But we find that Tony's engaged in battle with the Hulk to try to stop him from hitting a Stark Tech armory. But also, here's where we get the crazy explanation of what exactly Banner's got going on right now. Because Doctor Strange goes on to explain that Bruce has fractured his mind into parts in order to rebuild it into a starship. And he's done so by building a palace within his mindscape that prior to this point Doctor Strange would have thought was impossible. Because he scoured the earth searching and questioning every mystic and Omega level telepath to find who would be capable of doing such a thing. But even still, he found nothing. And Strange doesn't even believe that he could have pulled it off because the amount of magic that it would have taken to do something like this is just nuts. But with what Bruce has done, he's constructed a palace within his mindscape and he split his psyche into 3 distinctive parts, which Strange has seen from entering Bruce's mind and making a quick assessment before he was pushed out. But within this collective, you have the Mind Palace, to where inside Bruce sits as captain of the bridge of what collectively is your Starship Hulk, which officially makes Bruce a Smashtronaut. And I didn't make that up, it's Smashtronaut Part 1. And I'm telling you, had somebody just told me that this was Smashtronaut Part 1, I'd have been like, stop lying, that's a Future Hendrix song. Pluto. But on the outside of what's his body, or what's the Hulk's body, Bruce has added a ton of hardware which he had violently taken from AIM, to where he then somehow surgically implanted it onto his body, which is like your outer physical and second part of your Starship Hulk. And at this point, Strange really doesn't know the function of like this outer portion that's constructed with parts from AIM. He just knows that it's there and he pretty much just moves on to the next thing. Like, I'm sure we'll get further explanation about that at some point. But aside from that, we also have the third part, which is the last part that Doctor Strange mentions, which is a place within Bruce's mindscape that he calls the engine room, which is designed to cage up the Savage Hulk and feed off of his anger by sending at the Hulk a number of attacks, which gauge to whatever level that Bruce wants to send it to. And with Bruce increasing the attacks in the engine room, on the outside this increases the strength of the Hulk. And with what appears to be a lever that stages from levels 0 through 10, with 0 appearing to be just angry enough, we then come to find out that stage 1 was enough to beat half a dozen Hulkbusters, to where also while tearing his way through them, Bruce really didn't care if Tony was in them or not. But lucky for Tony, like, the last one didn't get completely destroyed, and that was the one that he was in. But it's here with us seeing Bruce defeat Tony and make his way through to the old Stark Tech armory, where we find that Bruce has made his way here to get to Project Arc. And with Project Arc, this is the Celestial that we had seen in Kingdom Black, to where Noel had taken control of it, and Tony had then taken control of that Celestial. And I want to make sure that this isn't confused with Tony's Extrembiote armor, because we had seen what happened with that recently within the pages of Extreme Carnage. But what we find out with Project Arc is that Tony has used the body of the Celestial that he had piloted during Kingdom Black to create this huge wormhole, so that in the case of any other crazy world-ending events, civilians could just be rounded up and they could head through this wormhole to a safe pocket dimension in order to get away from whatever impending threat. But at this point, Bruce lets Tony know that he needs to borrow it, and even though Tony tells him that it's not ready, Bruce really doesn't care and he takes the risk. But as Bruce steps through this wormhole, he pushes a button and he leaves a pre-recorded message, which is not to explain himself but more so as a warning, letting everyone know that he's leaving because they won't know how to deal with what he's going to become. Because as of now, the others, they have their solutions on how to deal with the Hulk, whether they be suits or rocket chips or some type of answer for the Hulk if he does something that's not in their best interest. But Banner lets them know from here forward they're no longer dealing with the Hulk, but they're dealing with him. And the heroes have no plan for him because he's not controlled by rage anymore, he's fueled by it. Which now not only begs the question of who's the good guy, whether it's the Hulk or Banner, but it also leaves us with the question of what the hell is going on. Alright, so hopping back in just after Banner had fought his way through a ton of Hulkbusters and made his way to Tony Stark's Project Arc in order to commandeer the unfinished project and make use of this unstable wormhole. And when we jump back in just after he broadcasts his message and he makes his way through, and it's here where we see him enter the astral dimension between space, and immediately he's confronted by the alternate universe timeline hazard operations response and interventions team, who immediately make me think of Invincible just because of Ryan Ottley's art. But unfortunately, we don't spend much time with these guys, because for Banner, after making his way through, we see him give no heed to their warning when the Starship Hulk smashes through this whole crew while giving no acknowledgement to their presence. And as it turns out, this happened because Banner was asleep at the wheel, which likely was a result of how we'd seen before when Banner had first went through the wormhole, and the stress of just stepping through it had mental Banner just bleeding through his eyes and his nose and everything. But at this point, with Banner smashing everything in his path, you know, Smashtronaut, Pluto. But then it's here where he finds the Starship Hulk getting pulled into this dimensional fissure, which has the Hulk bound up, and the energy coming from it is straining the Starship Hulk's limitations, which are then causing Banner to get all these warnings, letting him know that physical regression is imminent because someone or something is attempting to capture him and pull him in. So at this point, Banner's kind of given the decision, like, either the Starship Hulk breaks free or he allows himself to get taken in. But if he does nothing and he just struggles in between, then this thing will force the exterior Hulk to revert back to the human form of Bruce Banner, leaving him on the outside to deal with whatever this is. So of course, naturally, this causes Banner to demand more power from the engine room, which from here causes him to elevate things from stage 1 to stage 2. And like we'd seen with how this is done with Bruce locking the Hulk away in the engine room, so that every time he moves the lever, the Hulk's attacked, so that the higher the stage, the angrier the Hulk gets, with him having to fight harder on each stage, which then gives Banner more power from the engine room to give to the Starship Hulk. But also with us seeing this and Banner having it designed to where Fing Fang Foom and all these classic monsters from your earlier issues of Hulk are showing up in the engine room to attack the Savage Hulk, and already it seems like these aren't like just generic foes coming to attack the Hulk. And it really seems like within each stage, Banner has it designed for the Savage Hulk to face a familiar enemy, which will either raise in difficulty or it'll be tied to specifically who made him more angrier over the years. And that's just one of the things we'll have to wait and see. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and we'll probably refer back to it at a later point. But then it's here where Banner realizes that whoever's wheeling him in, that they're also scanning the Starship Hulk specifically for gamma radiation. And when Banner sees this, right away he thinks that it's the Avengers and they found him and they're trying to find some way to wheel him back in. And as a result, he then goes from stage 2 up to stage 3. And this is what takes us from seeing the Savage Hulk destroy all these classic monsters to where now and it's kind of ridiculous, but it goes to where now at stage 3, he now has to face a giant sized classic Wolverine, which again for the Hulk is one of those back down memory lane matchups, but of course in this case over exaggerated like through the roof. But once again, like I mentioned before, it really feels like Banner has handpicked the opponents for each stage in a very strategic way to gradually get the Hulk angrier and angrier so that Banner can get the most out of this engine room. And with them literally using a giant-sized Wolverine for stage 3, it really seems like the order and the selection of these opponents is very intentional. But also, just out of curiosity, let me know who you guys think is at stage 10. Just curious to know what you guys think, because so far it's looking like we're getting specifically past opponents of the Hulk, rather than just generic or random people for him to fight, with stage 1 being the military from presumably your old classic General Ross going after the Hulk days, 2 being Fing Fang Foom and the classic monsters, and stage 3 bringing in Wolverine. Because it really looks like with each of these, Banner's aiming to hit a nerve. But at this point, with the Starship still under restraint, Banner's now upset with the Hulk, yelling for him to get up and fight Wolverine, because at this point the Hulk is not generating enough power for the engine room. And from what it seems, Banner can only crank it up after the Savage Hulk has completed the previous stage. But also, like, it's here where Betty steps in, and we're not really sure of what specifically her role is, because at this point it appears like she's a construct that was designed also to look like a crew member, and it looks like Banner had built her along with the bridge and everything else in his mind to put her like in an advisory role to either will him back or speak reason to him at times, or she may have been placed there by other means. But still, that's kind of one of those things that we're figuring out as we go. But when Betty steps in here telling Bruce that he's going to break the Hulk, he tells Betty that she's wrong because as far as the Hulk, he's the strongest there is. As we see the Hulk defeat this version of Wolverine by breaking off one of the adamantium claws in his mind and putting it through this Wolverine's chest. But even with this happening and the Hulk completing stage 3, Banner's still getting alerts for critical damage and the hull being compromised, and the Starship Hulk still hasn't been able to break free. But then it's here where Betty tells tells him that Bruce isn't gonna make it because he's not strong enough. And also she goes on to tell him like this is what he gets for making a deal with the devil. And of course Bruce responds like, no, I can do this. To where even for a moment it seems like he wants to take the engine room from stage 3 to stage 4 when we see his hand back on the lever, but in this moment he doesn't do it. But also with Betty making these remarks and telling Bruce of making this deal with the devil. At this point there's a number of ways that could go as far as what that's really referring to, whether it's a callback to whatever happened in El Paso, or if it's a tease towards the theory of Bruce merging with the Devil Hulk after the conclusion of Immortal Hulk. Like the true meaning of what that means, it's in the air. But nonetheless, I imagine that it carries significance, and we'll see soon enough where exactly that's going. But nonetheless, with Betty putting these words in Bruce's ear, and him hesitating but telling her we need to keep going, like they just need more power, and she warns him that doing this will kill, and it's like it's just cut off there. Because without Bruce moving the lever to the next stage, the critical failures continue, with not only damage being taken to the hull, but also to the bridge, as the Starship Hulk just continues to be pulled in. But with this happening, he's not reverted back to Banner form, which is likely a product of him moving it to stage 3. But even still, he's taking heavy damage, but still yet in Hulk form. But it's also here, like when we see the Starship Hulk get pulled into this other location, like when I first read this, I kind of had some ideas of who this might have been, because Bruce's assumption of it being the Avengers, it didn't really sound like that would be the case. And I mean, it does sound like the logical thing for Bruce to think after all the damage that Bruce has caused with them so far. But with Bruce heading through the wormhole this early in the series, I just didn't see him leaving the Avengers, going through the wormhole just to meet the Avengers again. But with him meeting the stranger who not only successfully contained the Starship Hulk, we also know that this guy was searching him for gamma radiation, and the technology he used to capture and contain, they were designed to be used against something or someone who used gamma radiation. And when Bruce sees this guy, of course, he's like, okay, well, who are you? But also upon Bruce's arrival, this guy looks at him and he's shocked that he's finally caught one after all these years, meaning that he's made this a type of practice for some time for whatever reason. But with the stranger bringing the Starship Hulk to his world, Bruce threatens this guy to let him go, or else he'll rip his world in half, which from there, like the stranger, he's not threatened, but instead he's just more so shocked that this version of the Hulk is intelligent, which to the stranger's a lot different than the others that he had encountered, with this one being able to reason and understand. But also when the stranger reveals himself to Bruce, and he introduces himself as Dr. Bruce Banner, and it's here where I was like, okay, I had a feeling it was another Bruce, with us traveling through the astral dimension between space and the potential of reaching alternate timelines, and then the Starship Hulk getting pulled in by some other gamma specialist. Like I had a feeling we're reaching towards another Bruce here. But as far as what other world this Bruce is from, it's really much too early to pinpoint what that could be, because it really seems like something new altogether. But with seeing this, I'm open to the idea of where it could go, because especially after seeing the first 2 issues of this and us diving into the whole Smashtronaut thing, I'm definitely in the headspace of like, okay, I'm just gonna enjoy the ride and see where this goes, because it's likely by the time we get to like the 5th issue or so that we'll have more of an understanding of where this is going, because it's not like Donny Cates to throw in this many things for no reason. And with what I've seen so far, like I gotta stick around and find out like what's going on. Alright, so jumping back in and picking up with just complete and utter destruction. And it's here where we pick up where we get a glimpse of the incident from El Paso, to where all we really know at this point is that the Hulk went off the rails and a lot of people died. And when we jump in here, we don't really get more details as far as how this went down, but instead we get this narration from Banner with him describing what it's like when the Hulk quote unquote lets him back out. Because sometimes he just lays there and he waits to hear sirens or people screaming or people dying, with the rare event of him waking up to a happy or joyful aftermath where people are excited that the Hulk saved the day, because those moments pale in comparison for Banner to the times where he's woken up in the middle of some disaster. And it's here where we hear Banner express that the world has done anything but run short on forgiveness for the Hulk, because regardless of what the Hulk's done, the world eventually seems to look over it. But in the case of Banner, he doesn't forget. But then also for Banner, it's here where he's met by a large, dark, hulking figure. And right away Banner's like, what have you done? I thought we were a team. Why would you make me do this? And this hulking figure just responds, because you are weak, boy, and he just crushes Banner's head, which is just a crazy way to start this issue off, if I might say, because I kind of feel like for the first time this series has really got my attention now. But as it turns out, for Banner, this flashback was a dream. And when he wakes up just to find out that this Dr. Bruce Banner that he had just met within this unstable pocket dimension had put him to sleep by giving the Starship Hulk a sedative, and right away Bruce goes off tossing this guy and demanding that he gives him answers. And again, Bruce asks him who he is as if he didn't already tell him, but with how it's done, it's almost like Bruce is like, okay, cut the crap, tell me who you really are. Tell me what's going on here. but for the Doctor, and really just out of pure amazement that this is a Hulk that is talking. But in his amazement, the Doctor tells Bruce that he's never met an abomination with such agency. And right away Bruce is like, what did you just call me? And like, you can tell in his eyes he's about to go full Jason Derulo on this guy. Because it's one thing to call someone by another name, but there's just certain names you just don't call other people. But this other Dr. Banner, he clears it up pretty quick, and he lets Bruce know that the abomination title, that's just something that his superiors had classified the gamma mutates that were like Bruce. But as he goes on to give up more information, he tells them that his name is Dr. Bruce Banner, and he doesn't mean him any harm, but he wants to know in return if there's a name that he would prefer for him to use rather than just calling him an abomination. And it's here where Bruce tells the Doctor that his name is Dr. Robert Bruce Banner as well, but also where he comes from, he's also referred to as the Hulk. But with him telling the new Dr. Banner that he's also a doctor, and it's here where he tells them that the two of them should compare notes. But before our Bruce can really get into this conversation, he's then interrupted by the ship's computer, giving him alerts of the engine being in danger of overheating because he had left the engine room cranked up to stage 3 and the Hulk had just been fighting this whole time. But when the system computer reminds him, he turns it back down, and right away when this happens, the giant Wolverine who looked like he was sent by Rita Repulsa, like he just disappears. But even still, with the huge Wolverine gone, Hulk is then met by this same dark hulking figure who this time is way bigger, like he's towering over the mountains. But when Hulk is met by this figure, it's only for a brief moment before this thing just turns away and disappears, leaving Hulk there asking who this is and him telling this thing to please come back. Which I thought was a pretty interesting touch that the Hulk would say that, with the Hulk being classically known for saying leave me alone. But then it's here where we see the Doctors sharing notes with each other to where we jump in on the latter end of the original Bruce's story, which we know. But as he's finishing, he then gets another alert from the ship's computer saying that there's some unusual activity and energy in the engine room to where the radiation signals doubled, and then they suddenly, and Banner just cuts it off right there. And man, it's like we're hearing this, they doubled, like, I don't know Banner, you might want to check that out, because if nothing else, that's got to be a clear sign that you had more than one Hulk in the engine room. But with Banner brushing this off and getting back to the conversation with this new Dr. Banner that he just met, and it's here we ask the Doctor if he was searching for him because he was looking for a cure for himself, and it's here where Dr. Banner lets Bruce know that he doesn't have a gamma mutation, and he's not what Bruce would call a Hulk, but instead he's something much worse. And it's then here where we go into his backstory to where in his case the gamma bomb was a success, and here on his world with everything going perfect with the demonstration, he had thought that this was going to be like the beginning of a dream come true. Because he had dreamed of a green world with free energy and an unlimited amount of free power. But of course, with him delivering something this crazy and this phenomenal to the government, as you would expect, the powers that be took that power from him and they used it to set fire to the rest of the world. Which then, rather than making this Dr. Banner's dream come true and making him like a hero, it had instead made this Bruce Banner a destroyer of worlds. And with hearing this right away, Bruce, he can totally relate. Because more or less, he's kind of just like, well, don't you hate it when that happens? No, he ain't say that, but he let the Doctor know that he knows that feeling. But then it's here where the Doctor admits that he's been hiding here this whole time, and in a way trying to make things right and atone for his sins, but also he was looking for somebody like Banner. And it's here where he shows Banner to where after his higher-ups had just bombed the rest of the world, leaving nothing but the United States, making it the greatest empire in history. And although it be in a messed up way, but I guess a lot of messed up stuff happens when empires are being built. But then it's here where Dr. Banner tells Captain Banner that across the world, aside from the crazy death toll, that there are also a number of survivors that the military classifies as bio-waste casualties. And before even seeing it, Captain Banner already knows that this Dr. Banner is referring to other Hulks. And man, when we get a look at them, man, they look crazy. One of them looks like it's almost half brood or half bug, and it almost makes me think of something off of Men in Black that had just hulked out here in this world. But then also with Captain Banner seeing this footage, and I think I'm just gonna call him Captain Banner from here forward just to distinguish the two. But with Captain Banner seeing this footage, he then asks Dr. Banner, where are these abominations as you would call them, like where are they now? And real quick you can tell that Dr. Banner's getting kind of nervous, and he starts explaining himself like, hey, he was forced to build this thing, but Captain Banner or Bruce, he's just like, hey, just where are they? And it's here where the Doctor tells him like, I sent them where I found you, through that hole into the void. And when Captain Banner hears this, he goes off because Dr. Banner has practically made an interdimensional garbage disposal designed to just get rid of Hulks because his higher-ups deemed them to be abominations. And Dr. Banner tells him that this is why he had brought Bruce here, because he had wanted to study one of them and possibly heal one of them, which is why when Bruce came passing through, Dr. Banner picked up his gamma signature and pulled him in. And with Dr. Bruce telling him like he doesn't even know where they go when he sends them through. And he goes to telling Bruce again like the higher ups made him do this, he made me build this. And right then Bruce is like, who did this? Who is in charge? And Dr. Banner tells him, my father. And Bruce just freezes. But with the doctor saying this, he's not talking about Brian Banner, but instead he's referring to his father-in-law, President Ross, which for a second almost feels like we're dancing on the lines of Heroes Reborn, the 2021 Heroes Reborn. But if I remember correctly in that one, Thunderbolt Ross was the vice president. But even still, this is crazy, because not only did Ross get the gamma bomb that he wanted, but after that he then turned around and used it on the rest of the world. But also, I do want to say that this kind of does make me think of something, and this could be all the way left field, who knows? Because as of right now, we really don't have any solid evidence of these events being connected to the Immortal Hulk, or really this specific world for that matter. But I do want to say that with us seeing this version of Banner, who was successful at building the gamma bomb, to where then after he married Betty and Thunderbolt Ross became the president, but in a way it kind of reminds me of what we had seen in Immortal Hulk issue 49, just before Joe Fixit had walked through the Forever Gate, when we saw a version of what seemed to be a perfect happy life for Banner. And like with the exception of the carefree teenager, I could kind of see this world being something similar to a snapshot of the ex-military man along with the scientist and his loving wife, at least before gamma bombs had went off all over the world. And once again, not saying that that is what this is, but it's just a thought. Like, it's definitely one of the first things that came to my mind after reading this issue. Because for Bruce Banner, and regardless of what Banner is out there, it would make sense that even the best version of his life, it would still be tied in some way to some type of great destruction. Alright, so recently throughout this Smashtronaut event, we've seen 616 Banner get pulled from the pocket dimension that he had stepped into to another Earth by alternate Bruce Banner. And with this happening, Captain Bruce and this new Bruce, they had a rather in-depth conversation that gave us the backstory of what happened on this Earth, which we recently found out is Earth 122, which I thought before was used in like a Fantastic Four issue or something, but it still could be a thing, might not, I don't know. But in this reality, we're given the history that the gamma bomb that Bruce had created, it had been perfect. But with Thunderbolt Ross getting his hands on a perfect gamma bomb, he had then turned around and used it on the rest of the world so that no other countries could compete with the United States, because evidently that's what happens when you take Thunderbolt Ross, you give him a successful G-bomb, and you place him in the seat of President of the United States. But then also it's here where we see that he's gotten a message that Banner's been found in a specific mountain range, or at least they believe it to be him because of the huge gamma signature. And with him seeing this President Ross, he tells his people to send everything out there and also get him a dropship so he can go out there and see it himself, while also telling them to bring the boy, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit. But with this happening, like even in a regular world, it's fairly easy to imagine the shock that the president's staff would be experiencing if he were to just create a war zone and demand to be put right in the middle of it. Like, I just imagine that everybody in line of the order of succession, vice president, speaker of the house, they just looking at each other like, well, our titles are finna change real soon. But then again, that's just classic Thunderbolt Ross, like he would do something like that. But then also it's here where we jump over back to Captain Banner and Banner of Earth 122, and it's here with this Earth's Banner, he's showing Captain Banner more of how things played out on this Earth. With things like Tony Stark, who had pretty much just drank himself to death after the gamma bombs had went off all over the world, because after nearly the entire world is in devastation, nobody needed him, which is probably something that started when the gamma bomb was greenlit. Like, as soon as that project was successful, I imagine Thunderbolt Ross, he just hit up Stark Industries and was like, yo, I want to cancel all my bomb orders. But nonetheless, after President Ross had bombed the world, Stark Industries went bankrupt and Tony Stark drank himself into an early grave. But then also on top of this, President Ross had ordered to have the X-Men, the Children of the Atom, all the mutants of this world exterminated, because the way he saw it, the gamma mutates were enough of a threat. And like with the way we're shown this from the Banner of this Earth's archives, like while he's showing this to Captain Banner, like it's kind of crazy because the way it's documented, it's shown like this decision was made quick and that it was a reaction to the sudden outbreak of mutant kind, and the order to wipe out the mutants was just quickly given in order to preserve the safety of the people of the United States. But really, we know, just from what we've seen so far, that this was only President Ross securing his power, and doing so by causing the extinction of the mutant race. But also with Captain Bruce seeing these files and seeing these headlines, he just finds the savagery on Earth 122 just unbelievable. And he asks this Bruce, like, what about the other heroes? What about Blade or Moon Knight or Captain America? And for a moment he's about to say Spider-Man, but then this Bruce cuts him off and he's like, I haven't heard of any of these people. And when hearing this, it answers the next question, which I assume would be like, do you have Disney Plus? But even still, Captain Bruce is just like, that doesn't even matter, because the Hulk doesn't need anyone. And I tell you right now, spoken like a true Smashtronaut. But then this conversation is interrupted by the United States Army, which from what it seems at this point, President Ross has integrated Stark's technology with the US military, which is pretty much what we'd seen him use to attack Xavier's school. And in that case, again, it wasn't like the X-Men versus the military. No, that was just a pop-up extermination. So for the mutants, it wasn't like there was any kind of standoff moment before they were pretty much just wiped out. But for President Ross and this OP army, he's got these super huge Hulkbusters, but Captain Banner is not worried about them in the slightest. And this is what he tells the Banner of this world, because the Hulk has been up against his General Ross a countless number of times, and he's faced large machines and tanks plenty back in the 616. So when he sees this US Army, he just tells this world's Banner like, I got this. So he slaves the Starship Hulk's communications to the other Banners, and he jumps into the fight with the engine room cranked up to 2. But then when he jumps into the fight with President Ross's army, he quickly finds out that they lasers hurt. And it's here for that reason why Captain Banner, he cranks up the engine room from stage 3 to stage 4. Which at this point, I'm not really sure if anyone's seen the enemy or enemies of this particular stage coming, because it's here for stage 4 where Captain Banner, he brings in Marvel zombies. And when this happens, it almost seems like it's a choice that the Hulk is enjoying a bit more than he should. Because when these zombies show up, he gives them the business. Which of course on the outside, because the Hulk is in the engine room cranking it up on stage 4, this then takes the Starship Hulk to a whole nother level. And he just stands up in the middle of these lasers that were just tearing him up a few seconds ago. And the likeness of this is just something that this President Ross has just never seen. But with Starship Hulk just walking through the US Army, the Banner of that world is just watching the Hulk do work. And it's here while he's watching where he gets radioed by the president, who tells him to make this thing stand down and turn yourself in. And if he doesn't after the count of 10, then Ross is gonna toss Banner's star pupil out of the back of the dropship right in the middle of all this chaos. In this Banner, he tries to plead with the president because he didn't make the Starship Hulk. Neither is he in control of that Hulk. So at this point, it's like President Ross is asking him to do something that he just cannot do. And at this point, like, we definitely know that this President Ross, he's not bluffing. He starts counting down from 10, and we know that without a shadow of a doubt that this guy, he would actually do it. Like, this dude literally bombed the world. Like, what's shooting one star pupil? Like, that guy's a monster. But while this is happening, Banner, he quickly tries to reach out to Captain Banner to get him to stop fighting. But mind you, even still, this is all happening during the countdown from 10. So like, there's no way that that Banner could have gotten all the words out unless he was just twisted from the shy, because you got to be talking pretty fast to get it all out that quick. But nonetheless, this Banner tried, and President Ross still dropped this kid from the dropship. And at this point, Captain Bruce, he's still trying to figure out like what's going on. He's asking Bruce, why does he want him to stop fighting? What's happening? What's going on? And even at this point, he sees the US Army fall back. And it's here where Dr. Bruce just cuts him off and says they killed him. And as it turns out, the kid that the president had dropped, his name was Peter. And on this world, Peter was one of Bruce's research students, and to this Bruce, Peter was like a son. But also on this world, Peter had also been bitten by a radioactive spider, but in this case, that radiation had been induced by Dr. Bruce Banner. But while he's telling all this to Captain Banner and more or less mourning Peter while he's explaining all this, Bruce also lets Captain Banner know that back when Peter was bitten by this radioactive spider, for some time Bruce had been working on a way to cure Peter. But with hearing all this, Captain Banner's kind of like, okay, as he turns around and just looks up and he asks Dr. Bruce a question that he pretty much already knows the answer to at this point. But he asks Bruce like, what kind of radiation was in that spider? As he turns around and sees this gamma radiated Spider Hulk just completely towering over the Starship Hulk, which lets him know, one, that this Peter is very much not dead, but then two, this next fight finna be something serious. Cause looking at this Peter, I don't even want to know where his webs are coming from. Alright, so with us jumping back in, with Captain Banner making his way to Earth 122, and quickly finding himself at odds with President Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, to where in his case, President Ross, he's taken every opportunity to demonstrate that he's on demon time. But with him throwing an insane amount of artillery at 616 Banner and the Starship Hulk, to only then see them tear through President Ross's military. This had then caused Ross to kick things up a notch by kicking Peter Parker into this fight, for us then to find that this world's Peter Parker is the unfriendly neighborhood Spider-Hulk. But before we get into the matchup between Spider-Hulk and Starship Hulk, first we go back to President Ross and Earth-122 Dr. Banner, to where at this time, President Ross is beating the mess out of Dr. Banner because he wants answers. Because as far as the Starship Hulk and what it's been doing, President Ross hasn't seen anything like this. And that's not just because of the whole Starship factor, but also this has a lot to do with this world, Earth-122, never having the original Gamma incident that transformed Banner into the Hulk, who was nearly unstoppable in the eyes of 616 General Ross. But instead, because on Earth-122, for the most part, these Gamma explosions, they've more so created Gamma mutates, who of course, even in this case, they've shown a lot of strength. But up to this point, they've been something that President Ross has been able to manage. But now in the case of Captain Banner and the Starship Hulk, that's no longer the case. So for President Ross, in this moment, he's in uncharted water. And with him trying to beat the answers out of his Dr. Banner, who he's now asking, where'd you find this thing? How is he controlling it? And more importantly, how does President Ross kill it? To where then Dr. Banner just laughs hysterically at the how do you kill it part. Because even in this moment, Dr. Banner, he realizes that quote unquote his story is always the same. And even though we're getting much of this through the narration of 616 Banner, who's saying much of this in reference to his alternate self, the Banner of this world, but after the conversations that we've seen them have, we know that the two of them realize that they're very much alike, with both of them being destroyers of worlds, even though that played out differently on each world. So with that being the case, like it's here where President Ross is asking Dr. Banner, what is this thing? And when Dr. Banner responds saying that it's me when I'm angry, and it's really him also saying that this thing is a destroyer of worlds. But really in this moment is also like something that just goes over President Ross's head. But in the case of Spider-Hulk versus Starship Hulk, like just going into this thing, Spider-Hulk is beating the brakes off of Starship Hulk, who at this point, keep in mind, Starship Hulk, he's at level 4. But you know, it's crazy with us getting a better look at Spider-Hulk, who in this case, his gums are even hulked out. And it's like at this point, forget braces, like he needs some crimson bands around them teeth. Cause this has got to be like the craziest Spider-Hulk we've ever seen. Because prior to this before, like we've seen Spider-Man Hulk out like in the early 90s, and more recently we've seen it happen again within Immortal Hulk, or really what was more of a tie-in to Immortal Hulk. But in either of those cases, you can look at those and say like that's a hulked out Spider-Man. But with this right here, like this here on Earth-122, this Spider-Hulk is appropriately named because the man portion is much of an afterthought like when you see this thing. But at this time with the Starship Hulk getting laid into, Captain Banner has his hand on the lever and he's getting ready to push it from stage 4 to stage 5, with stage 4 again being the Marvel Zombies. But externally, like this level of performance from the Hulk in the engine room, externally is not giving Captain Banner the output that he needs. But before Banner can crank it up a notch, Betty shows up again, and she's telling Captain Banner like, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're not gonna kill that kid, are you? He's just a child, he can't help what he is. And with how this is done, Betty, she goes on to tell Bruce that he knows what happens when you lock away a child and you abuse it and you take away its freedom, to where then that child bottles up all that fury and all that rage, and as a result, that child then turns into what you made it. And with saying that, she knows that Bruce is familiar with that process, because his rage and his hatred for his father is what crafted the Savage Hulk, with Bruce's anger and his desire to smash something. But then also with saying this, Betty then asks the question, what's gonna happen when the Hulk goes through that? What is he gonna turn into? Which really has been our discussion as well, because from the beginning of this whole Smashtronaut ordeal, as the reader, we knew this was a bad idea. And really, some of you guys even thought that this was a bad idea like in its entirety. Like, you know, you just want him to throw the whole Hulk away. But I'm referring to Banner's decision to throw the Hulk in this engine room and not just lock him away, but then on top of that, provoke him in order to fuel this Starship Hulk. Like, this just seems like a recipe for breaking the Banner system all in one swing. To where now, with the way that Betty describes this, like Bruce is treating the Hulk the same way that his father Brian treated him, and it makes you think like, wow, like why wouldn't this turn into the creation of something even crazier? But then here's the thing, because when Betty brings this up and brings this to Banner's attention, and she asks Bruce like, if this kid explodes, like what are you gonna do? And when Bruce responds, he says he doesn't know. And then he cranks up the engine room to level 5, which from there in the engine room, this brings in the gods, which really for the most part is Thor and a number of other characters related to Thor, or really just other characters who would correspond to a level if level 5 was just called Thor level, with it bringing in Odin, Malekith, Lady Sif, Heimdall, Beta Ray Bill, but also I understand why this wasn't called Stage Thor, because it would just be confusing if you went from Stage 4 to Stage Thor, but with Stage 5 being labeled just gods. Nonetheless, these are heavy hitters, and with this cranking the engine room up, Captain Banner pushes the smash button, and that is precisely what the Starship Hulk does, which from here takes the fight to Spider-Hulk literally on a level that he cannot match. And for that reason, this causes the fight to be over rather quickly, because for Spider-Hulk, who in his case, of course, he doesn't get angrier and stronger, but instead with the Starship Hulk putting out at a level 5, this then causes Spider-Hulk to revert back into Peter Parker, who then tells the Hulk, "I'm sorry, I do not want to fight anymore." But shortly after him saying this, he then sees that President Ross had ordered for bombs to be dropped right on top of these guys. But with Captain Banner talking to Betty, he's thinking at this point, since he saw Spider-Hulk turn back into Peter, he's looking at Betty like, you worry too much. Because for Bruce, really like his biggest problem within this series thus far is that he thinks he can control this situation. And really with just looking back at the incident from El Paso, it was Bruce's lack of control of the Hulk that caused him to take this extreme measure and make the Hulk into a starship to where Bruce would be the captain and he would have complete control. Because before this whole Smashtronaut ordeal, controlling the Hulk was the base of Bruce's initial method. But aside from El Paso and what all happened there, like we still don't know the whole story yet. But aside from this event that caused Bruce to take these extreme measures, the control method didn't work then, and this new Starship method, which is really just a tighter grip of control, it's now falling apart in front of Bruce. Because when these bombs land, the helmet of the Starship Hulk is destroyed, which internally completely compromises the hull. So it's like now for Bruce, who prior to this he had believed that with this setup that there's no way that he could lose control. But now what seemed impossible, it's actually beginning to happen. But back over with President Ross and Dr. Banner, this interrogation comes to a point to where Dr. Banner, he tells President Ross what he knows, which really is the same thing that we had seen him tell Captain Banner previously, because it's here where Dr. Banner just tells the president that he was trying to find one of the different gamma mutates that they had just disposed of before, because even though they were quote unquote disposed of, they still had to go somewhere. But with Dr. Banner looking for them, that's when he found the Starship Hulk, and he tries to warn President Ross, like, this Hulk that he found, he's not like any of these gamma mutates. Like, this dude different. And he tells President Ross if he keeps messing with this guy, this whole thing's gonna blow up in his face. But when President Ross clears the room so it could just be him and Dr. Banner, just the two of them talking. And it's here where he lets in Dr. Banner on a little secret. Because even though before this they had their arrangement to where Dr. Banner would help him dispose of different gamma mutates, but what President Ross didn't tell Banner was that he had been working with a guy by the name of Richards, which is likely a Reed Richards of this world, but that he had been working with Richards so that when President Ross would dispose of the weak gamma mutates, Richards would help Ross control the strong gamma mutates so that he could turn around and weaponize them. And it's here where we find that this payload that President Ross had dropped, that these weren't actually bombs at all, but instead these were just containers for the more stronger gamma mutates that he had deployed, who he also refers to in this conversation as abominations. But when hearing this, we also know that from Dr. Banner's conversation with Captain Banner, that President Ross refers to all gamma mutates as abominations. So in this conversation, when he says that, it's really more the case of President Ross telling Dr. Banner that he doesn't even consider these guys to be human, at least not anymore. Because Dr. Banner, he's begging President Ross not to send these guys out there, but the president, he could care less. Because from his perspective, these aren't even people anymore. But while all this is going on, back over in the Starship Hulk, we have Banner who's almost completely sucked out of the hull, and he's barely hanging on, begging for Betty to help him. But in the middle of all this, Betty keeps telling Banner that Betty is not real, which also through this series has kind of been the lingering mystery with Betty showing up here. But then it's here with this Betty, she just looks at Bruce and she tells him, like, look at you, you're helpless, trapped, at the mercy of forces and violence out of your control. And she asks him, like, does that remind you of anyone? And when she says this, she cranks the engine room up from stage 5 to stage 6, which then takes it from being stage 5 with the gods to now being stage 6 with the devils. And when this happens, with the engine room turned up to stage 6 on the Hulk, like, he is pissed. And with the Hulk in there and just being suffocated by enemies from stage 6, he just screams out to Banner, because regardless of who pushed this lever, the Hulk's mad at Banner because this whole thing was Banner's idea. And while this is happening, Betty's telling Bruce, it's really spectacular, isn't it? This thing that you built. I know I don't say this enough, but I'm proud of you, son. And she just grabs Bruce by the wrist, just letting him fly completely out of the hull, while telling him, we'll take it from here. And with saying that, Betty, or what appears to be Betty, then cranks the engine room up from level 6 to level 9 while saying, "Now let's see what this thing can do." And when this happens, man, like on the outside, your Starship Hulk, his eyes start glowing red and like crackling while he's covered with these abominations, and he just shoots these beams out of his eyes, just shredding these gamma mutates into pieces, which is how it ends for now before we get much of any more detail. But with us getting this Betty reveal, and like for one, we knew it wasn't actually Betty, but with us getting this reveal, which at this point only just ties it to this mysterious Hulk that we've been seeing, to now hear this thing say, "I'm proud of you, son," and now it's like it's begging even more questions that almost looks like the Savage Hulk created his own Hulk, either from his rage, which is how Banner created Savage Hulk, or if the Hulk created something that he'd seen as a father or protector, much like the story we got when Banner had created the Devil Hulk. But for the time being, we really don't know what this thing is, but I'm gonna let you know right now, I can't wait to find out. Alright, so picking up from where we left off with the Starship Hulk facing against General Ross's team of abominations while having Betty push the engine room to level 9, which caused beams to shoot from his eyes. But on the inside, with us seeing this figure of Betty appear again as Bruce completely loses control. And it's here with Bruce no longer at the seat of the command deck, where she goes into her own theory about the Hulk. And so we know at this point that this isn't actually Betty, but more so in this moment, this person's like, "Let Betty show you," with Betty being their choice of delivery to express this theory. And as she gets into it, you also have your Savage Hulk, who at this point is still in the engine room, which like we had seen him and cranked up to stage 9. And I remember a lot of you guys was just saying like, man, what could be stage 9? And it had me thinking of a number of ideas. But this right here has Hulk against the Inhumans, the Kree, Thanos, a hulked out Galactus, which even has Betty commenting on this like, yeah, for some reason Galactus is a Hulk. But on top of that, you got the Phoenix Force and the Living Tribunal. And at this point, with stage 9 being this crazy, she then says to her understanding that stage 10 is just purely hypothetical. But with her getting into this theory and saying how most people know the story of the Hulk, the story of the scared little boy overwhelmed with impotent rage because of the abuse he endured as a child, etc, etc. But over the course of years, there's been many Hulks. Red ones, blue ones, gray ones, Wolverine ones, which right away made me think of not just General Ross, A-Bomb and the others, but also Weapon H, who is a Hulk we really haven't heard from in a long time. And with him getting this small reference, it just put a smile on my face. But I'll also say that it would be nice for Marvel to bring him back. And if they do, I imagine that Gamma Flight would be like the perfect place to do it. Because mainly from talking to you guys, the question I get the most after our talks about Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk, it's how does Weapon H connect to that series in the Green Door? And I think it would be nice to get at least a few issues to tell us something. But either way, I digress. But in this case with Betty saying how there's been so many other types of Hulks, and we hear her say that it's come to the point to where it seems like everyone has got a Hulk. Bruce has a Hulk, Rick had a Hulk, Ross had a Hulk, and when I read that I was kind of like, what, Rick and Ross, huh? Somebody's gonna turn that into a bar. But it's here where she just goes down the line, Jennifer Walters, Amadeus Cho, and even the one above all. But out of all these people, there seems to be a bit of wasted potential, as if something's missing or as if someone was left out. And it's here when she's saying this and we're also watching the Starship Hulk go against Ross's abominations, to where on the outside it's escalating to a point to where these abominations, by the look on their faces, they want no part of where this is going. But it's here at this time where Betty's like, something is missing. Everyone has a Hulk, but why can't the Hulk have a Hulk? And right then the Starship Hulk hulks out. And man, this thing looks crazy. And it's just towering over these other abominations who were already towering over the Starship Hulk, with lightning erupting from its mouth and shoulders. Like, this is what a mad Hulk looked like. And I mean, we've seen a sad Hulk before with Clud during the Axis event, but this here is taking it to a whole nother level. And I'm not just talking about the appearance of this thing, because we talked about Club versus Nova, but this isn't that. This is just a slaughter. And while this thing is just on the outside letting loose, Savage Hulk is calling for Banner all the way from the engine room, but rather than like before where it seemed to come from a place of resentment, Savage Hulk is calling out to Banner for help, because currently in the engine room, hulked out Galactus, Thanos, and Lockjaw's got him hemmed up. But on the outside with this hulked out Hulk just destroying these abominations, we also hear radio contact reaching out to President Ross, telling him that this thing has changed, it's at least 30 feet tall, and out of all the Hulks we done seen on this planet, we ain't never seen nothing like this. And this is coming from a guy who's seen a planet of Hulks, and he's even at a loss for words. cause on this world they really just called them abominations. And when he sees this thing, he's like, no, this ain't that, cause this is a Titan. And with President Ross getting this news, he orders for a G-bomb to get dropped right on top of this site, which you can kind of tell, like, for Ross in this world, like, that's his answer to everything. But with the Dr. Banner of this world trying to tell President Ross that he can't do this because there's 3 major cities in that area, and President Ross just holds a gun to his head like, no, we're doing this together, because Ross wants Banner's help to spin this narrative for the media. But when they both hear the radio confirmation that the bird is in the air, and right then Dr. Banner just tackles President Ross, because even though he's not sure how exactly he's gonna stop him, he just can't let him kill thousands of people, like the millions he already has by using Banner's G-bomb. And so it's here where we then go back inside the Starship Hulk, to at this point Captain Banner, he's made his way back after hearing the Hulk call out for him. And when Banner gets there, you still have this Betty figure who's sitting in his seat at the command deck, and when Banner gets back telling her to shut it down, and she's more or less like, or what? Well, you gonna get mad? And like, what are you gonna do? And it's crazy because she tells him, you're not in control, you have no power here. And Bruce doesn't even argue with that, and he just tells her, I know, I don't, but he does. And when Banner says this, he breaks the glass and he pulls a lever, opening the door to the engine room. And man, when that door opens, man, it's just like the illest panel of the Hulk just stepping from beyond that door after practically killing the Marvel Universe. And it's like from here as he rampages through, we get like the sickest split between what's going on with Captain Banner as well as the Dr. Banner of this world. And with how it's done, it's just brilliant, because in a way it goes back to what Banner had said about himself in this Dr. Banner of this world being different, but the story's the same. Because it's right here where we see Captain Banner release the Hulk, to where we get a split view, and we see Dr. Banner who's taken President Ross's gun, and as Dr. Banner talks to the president, it's the same conversation as Captain Banner talking to Betty. Though I imagine a few of the words are different when it switches from one to the next, but nonetheless, just like Bruce said, though the two of them are different, their story is very much the same. But on both sides, you have the situation to where President Ross or Betty, they're both trying to talk the Bruces down, and even to the point to where they're both telling the Bruces, like, listen to yourself, you're not a killer, you don't have it in you. And neither Betty or President Ross could be any wronger about what Bruce has in him, because in both cases, both figuratively and literally, both of these Bruces hold nothing back, with Dr. Bruce assassinating President Ross and Captain Bruce letting the Savage Hulk confront the Titan, which from here on the outside causes the physical Titan to change back into the Hulk, with Bruce on the inside waking up in the engine room. And when he comes to, both him and the Hulk are back in there. And it's an interesting moment when we see this happen, because the Hulk tells Bruce, first, welcome home, and just after that, Savage Hulk tells Bruce that he's sorry, almost as if the Hulk knows now how Bruce has felt after all these years. But as soon as Bruce realizes what all's going on, he just rushes right back out. And we come to find out that in this very moment, the G-bomb that President Ross had ordered to drop on this site, it had been released with the payload set to drop shortly. And with Captain Banner rushing out of the engine room while also initiating the Starship Hulk repair sequence, during this time he can hear Dr. Banner telling him that he can't stop the payload from dropping at this point, but if Bruce can get himself back together in time, then perhaps they could find a way together to minimize the casualties. And what ends up happening, as soon as the Starship Hulk is reassembled, Dr. Banner gives Bruce access to his ship so that Captain Bruce can use it to pull the gamma signature of the G-bomb through this portal, and in a similar fashion to how Dr. Banner had pulled in Captain Banner back in issue 2. And the plan works, the portal opens up, Bruce gets sucked in along with the blast and radiation from the G-bomb, and on the way in, Captain Bruce adjusts the engine room to level 4 to more or less sustain the integrity of the starship. But as they leave, the last thing we hear from Dr. Banner is him say, I'm not sure where this portal will send you, but I pray that you don't end up like me, as we see the authorities go to get him, as Dr. Bruce is just sitting there next to the dead President Ross. But as the starship has made its way through this portal, the next thing that Bruce hears is incoming, and as he looks up, he sees Thor's hammer, fresh out of God of Hammers, and that thing is coming in hot. But with the scene that's here, this concludes Smashtronaut, and this is also like our lead up to Banner of War, which for a while now has been teased as the next Hulk vs. Thor event, with the conclusion of Smashtronaut colliding with the conclusion of God of Hammers. And I'm pretty sure that when this goes down, both Thor and the Hulk are gonna look quite different than the promotion images we've seen, because recently they've both gotten a crazy upgrade. And with that said, I'm curious to know who you guys think's gonna come out on top, because if they both go all out like we've seen them do recently, then it's gonna get nasty. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.